Well, hello everyone and welcome to this edition of Insight with Political Tours and Beyond the Headlines. Much of the international reporting on COVID-19 has been on more developed economies such as the US, Italy and China. But how do you tackle the disease in countries where social distancing and good hygiene are near impossible? And what is the impact of lockdown where half the population are living on the breadline? Our discussion today focuses on South Africa, and we have a great panel of experts with us here. Firstly, we have Thulani Madondo. Thulani is the co-founder of the Kliptown Youth Program in Soweto. His charity works with young people to help them get through high school, which is no easy task in his neighborhood. In 2013, he was recognized as a CNN hero for his organization's work. Hello, Thulani. Where are you at the moment?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Thulani Madondo. I'm in Kliptown, Soweto.
Fantastic. Well, great to have you with us, Thulani. Next, we have Paul Davis. Paul has just retired as chairman of Aurum, South Africa's foremost non-profit healthcare group. Aurum has spent the last 2 decades tackling HIV and TB and is now playing a critical role in the fight against COVID-19. Paul, you join us from Johannesburg, I think?
Yes, that's right. Thanks, Nick.
Fantastic to have you with us as well. And then lastly, we've got John Matisonn. John is a renowned South African journalist and author of a recent biography on the country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa. That book is entitled Cyril's Choices, and it's a very good read. Now, we're going sorry, I should say, John, you're there, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, where are you, John?
I'm in a little wine village called Franschhoek, about an hour from Cape Town.
And that's very nice it is too.
Yeah.
We're going to deal with this in roughly 3 parts. Now, firstly, the question we're going to ask is, what's happening at the moment? What is the impact of lockdown on these communities? And then we'll turn to Thulani to discuss this foremost. And then secondly, I want to turn to John, so that John can provide some political context. What was the situation in South Africa before the arrival of the new coronavirus, and how has Cyril Ramaphosa been handling it? And then thirdly, I'd like to bring in Paul Davis to give us some of the background and the kind of communities most vulnerable to disease, and ask what lessons have been learned from tackling previous epidemics, notably TB and HIV. Now, if you've got any questions, please look at for the Q&A sign, which is down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and come to you so that you can ask your questions live. What we'll do is we'll set you up so that your microphone can be turned on, and then you can just ask your question. Now, at the end of this hour, we'll also open up this to discussion so that you can contribute. What we want to do is you to join in the debate and hear your thoughts and views. So please don't hold back. And I will come to you. I will sort of ask you randomly questions, your thoughts about what you've been hearing. Well, let's get this discussion underway. Thulani, thank you once again for joining us. Just to start with, Thulani, can you tell us a little bit more about the Kliptown Youth Program and why you set it up? I think this is really going to help us get to grips with the kind of problems that people living on the breadline in South Africa face in their daily lives. So if you could just tell us a few words about that, that would be fantastic, Thulani.
Thank you for the opportunity. Kliptown Youth Program is an after-school program that serves 560 children and youth that comes from underserved communities. The community itself has a number of challenges where the unemployment rate is way over 80%, no schools, no recreational facilities. It's a shanty town or shack community. So I co-founded the program with friends because I was born and raised there. And we have always seen that growing up around our community makes you feel like you don't have any chance, because there's no real positive stories that you can look up to. So what we do, we provide homework assistance to 560 children. We also provide 2 meals a day, computer literacy to the community in general, But our main purpose is to help young people to become the architects of their own exit strategy from the poverty that they face. And we do that, of course, through ensuring that we create opportunities that we never had. So this is the work we have done over the last 13 years. And we feel so grateful to see the results of our work, seeing young people getting employable, getting to universities and colleges. So yeah, we're gonna continue to do this because without organizations like ours, a number of people would have lost hope.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining in. Now, earlier, very kindly, you went out and you made a bit of a video for us so that we could actually see the community that you're working in, and also to get some of the understanding of the context of lockdown in a community like Kliptown. But in the meantime, Thulani, just tell us about how long has lockdown been in the community? I mean, how long it's been in South Africa, I think, since the end of March. But what impact is it having in somewhere like Kliptown? How do people cope with it?
Life has been very challenging for the people in general, because a number of things that are being suggested or regulations that the people are supposed to follow, unfortunately, they are not that much realistic to people living in communities like ours. Social distancing is almost impossible because we're living in a community where almost like 15, 20 families have to share the same toilet, a communal tap that should be shared by almost 100 families. So these are some of the things that makes it very difficult around there. But one of the biggest challenges is the high rate of unemployment. So for many people that don't have food, unfortunately, it's really difficult for them to go and or to stay at home without any food.
And I believe people have to pay rent. They have to pay a monthly rent. And you were talking about people not being able to work. Can you just talk a bit more about that challenge? Not having money, you've got to get food on the table, and you've got to pay rent.
Yeah, so not everybody has to pay rent in our community because it's regarded as a squatter camp. But of course, for some people that may be having an extra room or so, then they will rent it out to people that may be coming from other provinces within South Africa. And those that may be working, they'll be mostly working as helpers in different communities. And since domestic workers were not regarded as essential workers, that simply meant that people have to stay at home. And unfortunately, a number of these people are people that are not registered to work or to qualify for things such as the UIF. So we know that the government have introduced several relief platforms, but again, that's not easy to access for people like ours, because to apply even for the 350 social grant that has been introduced for unemployed people, you need internet, you need a smartphone, which a lot of people in our community don't have such infrastructure. So what we seeing as a positive side of this is that since a lot of children are not going to school, then most parents have been getting an opportunity to really interact with their children and understand their children's work. But again, for those children who come from families where parents did not have a privilege or an opportunity to be educated, then it becomes also a big problem for them. And again, when we look at the funding that the government has been putting into the economy to save businesses in other places, these are some of the things that makes people coming from community like ours to really question ourselves that why these resources were not invested before even things like the COVID-19 came in. Because when you look at the 500 billion rands that the government have issued out to save the economy of the country, that's the money that could have avoided or limited the communities like Kliptown. Because, as I said, there are so many good things that have came out, but there are also questions that are coming up that it looks to us, what we have always been saying, that South Africa have enough resources for all of us. It's true, because it's a matter of allocation. Because when I sit and think up back in March or February, why we did not maybe take that 500 billion rands and spend it on the poor, because the biggest challenge is that we know very well that in South Africa, so many people go to bed with empty stomachs. And when the country have such resources, then it tells us that at times some people's lives are not important because
and
you
just to chip in there, you're when you provide meals for children at the moment, you can't work in Kliptown, so you're not able to provide those meals.
Yeah, we cannot provide the meals from our center, but through the support of our friends from all over the world, we've been able to provide food parcels to the families of the children that attend our sufficient enough to cover for a family of 4 to 5. And in addition to that, organizations such as One Fund and Click Foundation have been assisting us to provide additional food to other people that are also not members of our organization, because we're only serving a very small portion of people within our community. And we know that even now, as we speak, there are people that could have gone to bed with empty stomachs.
Yeah, I think we can play that video now. So let's just play that, the one with you doing the introduction, and that shows you a bit of Kliptown as well. So if Isabel can play that now.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Thulani Madondo. I'm here to share with you about some of the challenges that our community of Kliptown is facing during this COVID-19 season. Of course, in communities like this, it is very, very challenging to maintain some of the things that are being recommended by the government, such as the social distancing, staying at home, because we are living in a community where there's no privacy at all. So please join me as I'm gonna take you through some of our community. You will see behind me a lot of people are moving up and down. These are people that may be moving up and down not just because they want to, but because they are searching for some of the basic services and needs that during this time. Please join me. You will definitely see that as most of the people are on the streets, it's more about survival, because in communities like ours, survival is always the name of the game. Remember, Kliptown has no electricity, no schools, no recreational facilities, so people are just trying to survive on a daily basis, because the unemployment rate here in Kliptown is estimated at more than 75%, which simply means that a lot of people are not only struggling for basic things such as hand sanitizers, but also struggling with basic things such as water to wash their hands and food. Thank you. Yeah, I think what we'll see here, since there's no audio, I was basically taking the video of our community so that at least people around the world will understand what we're talking about. And as you may see around the community, there's no way you can keep yourself distancing and there's no way you can protect yourself when one tap is used by so many people. And
in terms of hygiene is very difficult in this kind of environment. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Thulani. I think we'll let that run. We'll come now to John Matisonn. John, can you just give us a bit of the background to the political context here? We know that Cyril Ramaphosa has been president for 2 years, but really there's been a huge amount of political and economic turmoil. This is your book that you've written here. This is Cyril's Choices, the book that you're the author of. But just give us some of the background, both in the political tensions that have been taking place, but also the economy. So we've got a bit of a context to work in here. John.
Thanks, Nick. Well, Cyril Ramaphosa took over just over 2 years ago, and he took over after 10 years under Jacob Zuma, who was widely accepted to have run a kleptocracy. When Cyril Ramaphosa took office, he was, he's a very popular figure in South Africa. He unlike his predecessors, he was an internal anti-apartheid movement fighter. He was founder of the biggest union in the country, the Mine Workers Union. He's considered the father of the Constitution. He's a lawyer, he's a constitutionalist. He's very well liked, and his opinion poll ratings have been consistently high. But when he took office, there was a feeling of what they called Ramaphoria. People expected a very rapid improvement. And over time, leading up to this COVID-19 moment, there was a real sense of disappointment that he was trying to do all the right things, he was saying all the right things, but implementation wasn't apparent. Then the pandemic happened, and he's handled it exceptionally well. I think you've read about that. Abroad, around the world, he's considered one of the model presidents in terms of his handling it. He moved quickly, even before there'd been any deaths in the country. He then implemented a strict lockdown and so on. But of course, you will see that while right in the beginning, everybody was very supportive, very soon tempers started to fray. There is a certain amount of social unrest. The economic hardship has been terrible. And just to put that in context for people thinking about the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9, at that time, our banking system was extremely well run, and so was hardly at all affected by the banking crisis that hit the world. However, our job losses were very high, because when what has emerged is really we have our unskilled labor force are the first to go, and they go in large numbers. So when something like this happens, and it's much larger, obviously the cost in human suffering is enormous. And I think what Thulani showed you there, I think every thinking person in South Africa is aware of that. And what the fear is, although the president has handled things very well, and the lockdown is well run, and I think Paul will explain more about that than I can. We've always feared, well, what happens if it gets into the big sprawling shack centers and townships?
Yeah.
And that's what we haven't yet seen yet, and we don't really think we've got to anywhere near the peak yet. And that's the big fear.
Okay, well, John, thank you very much for that sort of little summary. I'm going to turn to Paul now. I will go back and forth between people. If Paul just double check that your microphone is there. Can you talk now, just now? Yeah, I think you're fine. You're there. Paul, you've had an immense experience of dealing with both TB and HIV with the Aurum Institute. And you're in a unique position really to give us an overview of the broad spectrum of communities, more impoverished communities. And by that, I mean both in rural areas and in urban areas. Can you give us an overview of that sort of geography, if you like, but also the background in terms of the impact of apartheid and the legacy of apartheid on those communities as well? Paul.
Okay. The legacy of apartheid on health is profound. And one has to start there, is that there were two health systems. There was the health system for white, which included private healthcare and white hospitals, which was equivalent to any Western country's health system. Heart transplants could be done, liver transplants could be done. It was a very, very high standard system. And it was evident even in the budget, the bed price allocation for whites was 3 times that for the same bed allocation for blacks. So there was this huge separation of skill and also of services that were run for people. And black hospitals tended to be, there were some good academic black hospitals, but in the main, apartheid extended deep into the health system. And it became evident, essentially in the mining communities, where TB became a hyper-epidemic. It started obviously in the 30s and 40s, but by the time it got to the 90s, TB was, I think, 5 times more prevalent in the mining communities than in South Africa, and South Africa was 5 times higher than epidemics of the disease anywhere else. And then in the late 80s, HIV appeared, and HIV is very similar, I suppose, in a way to COVID, is that it's transmitted without the person feeling ill, but for periods up to 10 years before the person is aware that they've got HIV symptoms. So a population already bedeviled by poverty, by overcrowding, which is a fantastic venue for TB, you suddenly throw HIV on top of it, and HIV lowered the immune system and the responsiveness of people to TB and other diseases. So it was almost a perfect storm of epidemics. So you've got an epidemic suddenly of HIV, on top of which you've got the epidemic, now hyper-epidemic of TB, which devastates the community. I mean, just in a sense, to help you now, is that the death rate of TB is 170 people a day in South Africa. Now that's hardly 170 people have died from COVID, and yet the extent of TB is something like 60,000 people die of TB each year, and it's become the assassin of HIV. So it's a very serious health situation. The health policy in 1994 changed from tertiary high-level healthcare to much more primary level healthcare, and as a result of that, tertiary levels of healthcare was sort of kept more or less the same. It certainly wasn't expanded. And there was a lot of effort placed on trying to provide more primary healthcare. The one factor that wasn't seen at the time, and it's kind of one of those unseen consequences, is that the more primary healthcare facilities you've got, the more tertiary healthcare cases you're going to find. It's a terrible sort of conundrum in that sense. But as a result of that, and the result of the epidemic of HIV and TB, the primary healthcare system is much better equipped to handle the disease now presenting it of COVID, because TB and HIV involve case finding, case tracing, home visits. So there are more than 5,000 clinics in the country that have got really good seeking programs to find out about what's going on in that sense. So in a sense, that's it's been a positive equivalent, and South Africa is geared up faster almost than any other country to do tracing of COVID patients, because it's added it to what they were doing already for TB and HIV. So that's the one positive. The other is we are dreading the consequences of COVID in the sense of severe illness, whether it's respiratory or clotting, because that's going to require a very high level of care, which is not commonly available. Hospitals that do not have the right equipment, the right skills, in the numbers. They've got some of the skills and some of the equipment, but not in the numbers that we see as being required. And then you take the situation is very unstructured in South Africa. In well-to-do urban areas, the lockdown has been very, very adequate, and people have been very careful. The moment you go into a town like where Thulani comes from, which is not far from Johannesburg, and that's only one of the places, you suddenly get people living in conditions where you cannot isolate. It's not possible. You've got to interact with people, you're living in a small community, and you've got to go and get food and water and a whole lot of other things. And what's coming out now is that you've got to go and stand in queues, either to get your medicine or to get your pension. And now, because of the food issue and the food security issue, you've got to stand in queues to get food. And we're going to
come to some video actually of that in just a second, which we've got someone in, but I'm going to, whilst I think we've lost Thulani just for a second there. I don't know. I was going to come back to Thulani just now. Hopefully he can rejoin us. But in the meantime, Isabel, can you just line up the video just to reinforce what Paul was saying? Thulani's coming back. So Thulani, we lost you for a second there, but you're coming back again.
Yeah, sorry about it.
So Thulani, I'll come to you in just a second, but let's just have a look at this video. The video here now. I think we've got Peter Maritzburg, and this is, I think, the video coming up as of the market in Peter Maritzburg, and this was a few days ago, and this was pretty busy. And then we've also got some video of people getting rations north of Pretoria. Isabel, if you can just start Here we go. This is Peter Maritzburg. So that's obviously pretty busy there. I think what's even more shocking is the one that's going to come up now, which shows you how dependent people are on needy in terms of government support. And this is just north. The video that's coming up is from Moy Plus, which is just north of Pretoria. And you're going to see a queue, which I think must be about sort of 2.5, 3 kilometers long. It's a colossal queue. So if Isabel can just line that up, here we go. Here it is. There's no sound on this video here. So this is just to the north of the capital, and this queue is winding its way around. It's sort of doubled up, if you can see it there. We'll just let this run for a bit. This is drone footage, obviously. So while we're looking at this, Thulani, can you tell us what kind of support has been available to people in Kliptown? What kind of interventions have you seen in the last few 3-4 weeks?
Unfortunately, we haven't seen any support system that have came to our community, and most people were really excited that at least there's going to be this unemployment grant for the next 6 months, which is supposed to start in May. But up to date, people don't know how to apply. The links that are available, unfortunately, are not working. And then as for the food parcels, it's questions that we get daily from community members asking that when will the food parcels come to Kliptown or any other parts of Soweto. But the biggest challenge why we see these queues being so long is that the criteria for these food parcels that are offered by the government is totally unrealistic, because it targets people that earn anything less than, I think, 2,000 rands or 3,000 rands a month. And when you look at that now, figure, then you've got millions of South Africans that will be qualify for this. And even people that may be working, earning maybe 2,000 rands a month, then they qualify for this. So you find situations where like people who don't have anything at all are queuing with people that at least know they're going to have something come month end. But again, as most people haven't been going to work, they work in places that it's a no work, no pay situation. That means now they need to qualify for this. But South Africans are caring. Through our organization, we have also helped almost 2,000 families in Kliptown alone through the food parcels that our organization have been distributing, including today. So some people, because there's also the solidarity fund that people can also contribute towards in our country, but other people have chosen to partner with organizations like ours and other organizations nationwide, so that food can get to the people quickly without any overheads or any other additional costs, so that food can be given to the people immediately. Because people are not going to be hungry next week, they're hungry now. You know, and some of these social distancing challenges are caused by food, as Paul was saying. You find, when they say a truck of food will be coming, that will be a truck that maybe have 150 or 200 food parcels. Then you've got almost 1,000 people queuing, and there's no social distancing at all in such situations. Then we continue to pray that no one should be infected in our communities, because should COVID-19 reach a community like Kliptown, then it's going to be a disaster.
So, Thulani, just to sort of follow that up, do you think that the lockdown should continue, or do you think the pain that it's inflicting upon the community is too much? I mean, we've called this catch-22 because it seems to me there's no easy answer.
Yeah, unfortunately, for some communities like Kliptown, people have always felt pain even before lockdown. lockdown just makes it worse, because even those that could go and work as helpers or domestic workers cannot go anymore. But in general, if you came and asked anyone within our community about the economy, if the rent goes up and down, people don't care, because whether the economy is good or is not good, over the last 25 years, it hasn't reached the people within the community. So it also becomes a risk, because you end up having a country that has so many people that have nothing to lose. And when you deal with people that have nothing to lose, then that's why even right now you still see some strikes in other parts of the country. And it's because people are in need, and people really need services, and serving the country through media and other things is not what's going to assist the nation. But another biggest question is, where is the deputy president? Cyril Ramaphosa have really done a lot of good work, but some of us feel he's overworked. Where's his deputy? Instead, when we look at people like Minister Zweli Mkhize, the president, we feel like those are the people that a lot is on their shoulders. And through the local government offices, they should be also getting some support. Because when you listen to the TV being told that there's going to be this kind of relief for communities like Kliptown and rural communities said by the president, first thing you have to think of is that when will it reach me? And by the time it reaches me, it will be 2-3 months down the line. That's the reality we have seen, unfortunately.
Okay, so we are going to send links for anyone who wants to give anything to the Kliptown Youth Program. We'll send us a link so that you can, if you want to donate something to Thulani's organisation, which we know does great work with school children in a very impoverished community. So we'll be sending that link out. Paul, I want to come to you in a second to talk about what can be done. But before I come to you, I want to ask John, how is Cyril Ramaphosa being, there have been violent protests. There was a school burnt down yesterday, I think. There's a real sense of unease, a sense that this lockdown really is too much. How's he handling it? And please, can you lean forward a bit to the computer so we can hear your voice a bit more clearly? Thank you.
Sure.
John.
All right. Well, just to take up from what Thulani was saying, I mean, the fact is that we think there are 3 or 4 excellent people around Cyril Ramaphosa, and that's about it. Most of the cabinet are very weak, and several of them are undoubtedly not honourable. And so the feeling is, just as Thulani said, the president's working hard, the health minister is good. Excuse me, but the deputy president whom we refer to, people feel that although Cyril Ramaphosa is not perfect, we dread anything happening to him because the deputy and others around him are just not up to replacing him. And so what happens is that you find that implementation, which was of policy, which was really poor before, continues to be poor in this context. So there's hope that if what the president is showing is able to do now can be transferred to other aspects of the society, that would be great. But the fear is that implementation on the ground is still very, very hard. Just to your point about schools, you referred to one school being burnt down. The last figure I saw was about 400 schools have been vandalized in South Africa. Now you ask why that is, and of course there's a sort of knee-jerk assumption that this must be people not looking after their schools. It'd be interesting to hear Thulani's perspective, but what I've picked up is that in many cases the people vandalizing the schools are people who hope to get contracts to fix the schools. And so there's a lot of social unrest and potential social unrest, and it's not always what it first seems to be.
Okay, everyone, if you've got questions, please do ask them. There's a little box at the bottom of the screen, Q&A, and I'll come to those in a second. Thulani, just come back to that point. I mean, the people are angry. I mean, protest isn't logical sometimes. People just burn down buildings. I mean, how do you perceive what's happening? I mean, I've heard there's been violence in Khayelitsha, there's been violence in lots of townships.
Yeah, it goes back to our leaders back in '94. During apartheid time, it was more about destroying, everything we come across, because the previous government did not really care, or it was not servicing people equally. But when the democratic government took over, I think people were never informed that now they're in power, now they're in position. So for us, I feel very disappointed when I see people destroying infrastructure, because you can't be fighting maybe Cyril Ramaphosa or the government through abandoning your own school, because tomorrow it's gonna be your children that need that school.
Yeah,
Yeah. And same thing with the clinics and other things. So luckily within our community, we have never seen something like this. But as John has correctly said, it is that some of the people around us are opportunists, that they know that if we vandalize this school, soon there's going to be a tender to fix this school, and then you're going to get a job,
Okay, so you think there's some truth to that? Okay.
Yes, there is some truth on that, because sometimes you see the people that were maybe part of the protest tendering to fix the same institution that they've messed up.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
again, that takes the resources away from other things that could have been done.
Okay. Paul, the government's got no choice. You must think that. I mean, the potential of this disease in those townships is horrific. What do you think they should be doing? Is there anything else they should be doing? They could be doing?
It's a question on everybody's minds as to how should they be managing this. I think that they should be more realistic about what they can expect. I mean, I think in overcrowded communities, in vulnerable communities, all you can do is try and protect those that perhaps need protection, which is, and here the comorbidities are not just diabetes and heart disease and all the Western type of diseases. It's poverty, it's malnutrition, it's TB and HIV. You've got a country that's got 7 million people who have got HIV, only of which 5 million are treated. So that's 2.5 million people that aren't treated, that we know about, and they don't, and it may be higher. The death rate, as I indicated, of TB is extremely high. So there has to be I don't know how, you can't isolate people. And in a way, you're going to get a kind of Swedish option, but without services to cater for the vulnerable. I mean, that's really how I see it moving. That there may be.
What does that mean? I don't understand. So
Swedish, where you allow some sort of social interaction and social closeness, and you hope that the numbers of people who get really ill, you'll be able to deal with the medical services that you've got. Now here, it may not be a conscious decision to let it go, but that's what's going to happen. It's almost impossible. I cannot see how they're going to manage in the next 2 months, how they're going to manage any kind of social distancing that's going to make any difference whatsoever to COVID. And in fact, it's the perfect storm for COVID. COVID flourishes in overcrowded, close contact situations. I mean, that's its hunting ground. So it's in a way, you've got to, I suppose, hope that herd immunity gets there quicker in a way. And there's going to be a huge loss of life from the disease, loss of life from the starvation and the poverty. That's going to be maybe even of a higher order. Unless, I mean, it's a terrible dilemma. It's the madness of South Africa, is that there's no famine here. There is food. There's no shortage of food. It's shortage of distribution and able to getting the food to the people that need the food. Now that's just pure logistical stuff. And the situation, if they could organize it, is solvable and quite quickly. And that's both from the government's perspective and the private sector, is that if you just had the thing to feed people, maybe you've got something to do with managing the disease. But managing the disease by itself and not feeding the people is a certain recipe for disaster.
You must be aware of some of the modeling. I mean, what you've just been saying now sounds devastating. It sounds like potentially, tens of thousands of, or at least maybe hundreds of thousands of people dead as a consequence. Is there? What are the projections that you're hearing? A, and B, I know that the work that has been done to try and stamp down on HIV and TB has been incredible in a way. You've got about 18,000 people going out into the community, tracing where TB and HIV patients are, seeing if they're taking their medication, and that's fairly impressive. We don't have that kind of thing here to chase COVID. So that gave me a sense, there's potential there for them to track it. But what you're saying is, no, the disease is too prevalent. It'll spread too quickly. There's no way we can deal with it.
We don't know enough about the disease. That's where I have to start. There's so many unknowns. We have an idea of how it's spread in urban areas, in more well-to-do areas. We've got no idea how it's going to spread in communities that are like Thulani's or in rural areas. We really don't know. And then in areas where people have got TB, HIV, and other issues, it's all unknown. I mean, in America, if you have got HIV and you're on treatment, your chances are the same as any normal person. And one would hope that of the 5 million that are here, that's an adequate to at least give them that kind of equal chance. But then there are 2 or 3 million people that have HIV and who aren't on treatment. That's a massive reservoir of people who are going to be much more affected by the disease. And certainly if you've got a TB, you are very much more at risk of very severe illness. So we've got a very unknown, I don't find a good scenario. I mean, everyone was hoping that all we've done is very successfully flattened the curve in its initial phases. But we're just getting to the kind of exponential side of the curve in terms of the infection in South Africa. I mean, it's doubling every 6 or 7 days at the moment, and that's going to increase, particularly as more tests are done. And then if you look at those pictures where people are queuing for their pensions, queuing for food, queuing for, where do you buy food? There are no supermarkets in those places. It's got to be food distributed, and it's got nothing to do with money. It's got to be, as Thulani says, take that 500 billion and buy food and just send it out there, because that at least will have a benefit.
Yeah. Thulani, what are you thinking as you hear this?
Yeah, I think what Paul is saying really makes sense, and it's things that we've been looking at also as people on the ground here, to really think on how's the engagement. If the engagement is only at a national level, it gets to be challenging at the same time for people around us to really understand. As he correctly said that some people, it also about the haves and have-nots, and it starts, it's in almost every sector, including schooling, and if you need food, you cannot buy online. You've got to physically go and queue there to get into a supermarket. And according to the regulations of the country, each supermarket should have at least 50 people, not more than 50 people inside at a time. That simply means that firstly, you need to go and queue outside for almost an hour or two, if not more. Then the same queue inside when you've got to pay and go, and then most people are left stranded because even the transportation moves during certain times. So if you went to a supermarket at 9 and you finish around 11, it's either you've got to do a very long walk or you've got to wait there until 4 p.m. when the transport resumes. So some of the things, as they are being suggested, we do strongly believe that when those decisions are made, people are looking mostly at developed communities around Soweto, because if almost everyone nationwide that is in a rural community or a squatter camp or township, these things that are being suggested will never work. If you tell me to go and self-quarantine, where, and how am I going to get that access? And then, it's just stepping. But again, we are grateful about the initiatives that the government has been making. It's just that I think they should have done more. They should, as I said, that since the national government is doing a lot, then the provincial and local governments should be reaching out more to the people. Because sometimes you listen to the National Command Task Team addressing the nation, and then the following day, the same thing is being said by the Premier. And it's the same thing you were watching on TV from the National, rather than maybe
actually happening. Okay.
Yes, rather than maybe taking it to the next level, where like you start avoiding all of those things, And again, some of these things you need a sense of humor when you approach them. Some of the things that we hear of, it's sending out military. Most of our people are really scared of military. Even if somebody's walking peacefully, but as soon as you see that uniform, then you start thinking something terrible is gonna happen. While there's no such. So we've
got some good questions coming up here. So let me just take some questions. So Isabel, if you could line both Simon Jackson up, Simon's there, and then Paul Jackson after him, and then Sheila de Beleg after that. So Simon, you've got a question which could, I think, probably be addressed to John, but maybe Thulani wants to chip in as well. Simon, go ahead.
Sure. If there were to be a significant level of civil unrest, would it be entirely localized, or is there anyone capable of organizing it on a wider level?
Yeah. John, you might want to talk about the EFF and just explain a bit about who they are and how they're a possible threat to the ANC.
Well, yes. Before I answer, let me just take a slight step backward. The economy has been in poor condition for at least 10 years. And the last 2 quarters were negative growth, which means we were already in recession when it started. And we'd allowed our budget. Our budget was actually in very good shape 10 years ago. It's in very poor shape now. We've been overspending, and the government isn't running efficiently. So it wasn't prepared from a financial point of view to manage this problem. Now, as regards civil unrest, there have been well over 10,000 cases of serious protests, with several thousand violent per year for some time now. Many of them most of them sort of start off as localized, and as we said earlier, often it gets mixed up between people who are genuinely complaining about service delivery and others who are opportunistically using those protests. To come to Nicholas's point, there is a populist movement that has 35 seats in Parliament. It's called the Economic Freedom Fighters. They're an offshoot out of the ruling African National Congress. They're youngsters. They're sort of they're media savvy and social media savvy and opportunistic and populist, and will latch on to any issues like this that give them public impact. And so it's totally possible. Up to now, political parties haven't really challenged what Ramaphosa's done. They've more or less supported him. But we're really, as Paul also said, we're entering the difficult period when you really start to feel the suffering going on more than a month or two, both economic and medical. The EFF are quite capable of switching on a dime and deciding to exploit this to their own advantage. And they're good organizers.
I think that answers both those questions, because we had Paul Jackson as well, who the question Paul was asking. I don't know if Paul, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Yeah, Paul, go on. You. I think your question has been.
It has really. My question to you, John, and the others, of course, was: will the monopoly power of the ANC be swept away by the virus? And by the way, John, you can't seem to buy your book on Amazon. I've tried.
We just had a conversation about that. We were trying to help John so it could happen, and he's working on it at the moment.
I'm fighting with Amazon. They won't accept my South African bank account, but we'll get there eventually. To your question about the ANC's monopoly power, right now, I don't see any effective challenge as long as Ramaphosa stays the leader. If Ramaphosa were to be deposed, which is unlikely but not impossible, then I think all bets are off. The party could easily split. But right now, the other parties are still far weaker. The concern which links to what Thulani was saying about the police and the military have been brought in and they behave badly. They're not properly trained and equipped to handle this kind of problem. And there are numerous reports of overreaction by the military and violent action. There's even at least one death that's being investigated now. So, in the foreseeable future, one doesn't see the ANC being pushed out of power as long as Ramaphosa is president, which is an important qualification. But of course, we're entering into uncharted territory.
Absolutely. Let's bring Sheila Delay in, if Sheila's there.
Yep, I'm
You've
here.
got a question, I think, for Paul Davis, I think. Sheila, go ahead.
I think Paul has actually really answered my question already, but it was to say that it seems that sub-Saharan Africa as a whole seems to have suffered less from the virus than the rest of the world. Is this just a matter of time and the peak is on its way, or could there be other factors which explain this? Is it going to get very much worse in South Africa?
So, Paul, you also do work in Mozambique and somewhere because you've got
Mozambique and Ghana. Yeah, but I don't know the answer to your question, Sheila. It's that I don't see the virus behaving differently. I think in Africa it's a late entrant, and climate may have something to do with it. But I can't see why it's going to be that different. I wish it would be. I wish there would be some protective situation in Africa that would reduce the amount of. But as the graph is going in South Africa now, it's mirroring every other country's graph of infection, and it may be just that the initial numbers in Mozambique and Ghana are small, or the system isn't picking up anything. We just don't know what it is. But it's a certain worry. I mean, I would hope that there is some factor that would spare Africa, whatever it is. Because if it behaves like everywhere else, it's going to be devastating.
Philip Godfrey has got a question. I think there's a sense everywhere around the world that COVID is going to change politics dramatically. It's going to have a devastating effect on all our economies, and it's going to produce a sort of an ideological shift in many countries around the world, certainly in the way the differences between rich and poor in Western democracies. Philip, I think you've got a very good question. If you're there and can chip in, that'd be great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up quite well, actually. It was really posing that almost existential question that a lot of countries that are suffering from the COVID are asking themselves at the moment, both rich countries and poor countries. To what extent is South Africa asking itself difficult political questions? Is anything going to change in the panel's view as a result of this, or is it going to be the same old, same old? Really, that was the question I had in mind.
Yeah, let me go to Thulani first, and then I'll come on to Paul, if I may, and then John. We'll do all three of you. Thulani, there were massive expectations at the end of apartheid, and there was a belief that there would be, big changes in infrastructure, development of housing, access to basic things like electricity, water, and education. Yet, in the community that you work and live in, those three things don't exist. What do you want to see?
We definitely want to see our country changing for the unrest. But as for political landscape,
your microphone is just a bit, maybe.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Yeah. So what I basically see is that it's been challenging, and I think it's going to be still the same when it comes to our political landscape. Why I'm saying so, this is something that is being, to other people on the ground, it's being seen as if it's something that is being tackled by the ANC. You know, if our politics were to change, at least in some of these command councils and other things, other political leaders could have been involved, then that would have showed us as people that this is not an ANC problem, this is not an EFF problem, but it's a challenge that is facing the nation as a whole. So all we have seen is opposition leaders, you know, applauding what's being done and all of that, but we haven't been seeing them at the forefront, you know, of fighting the disease, or, you know, throwing in the advices. We know that we always hear that there's consultation on everything that the president has been doing, but we haven't heard, for an example, the likes of Julius Malema from EFF, you know, talking about some of the things that needs to be done. So that's why, going back to the first question that was asked, if the unrest had to come, it will come from the ground, from the masses on the ground, from people that by then would have lost hope on the leadership of the nation. Reason being that those people are all staying at home. They've all locked themselves in very nice mansions, when the people that vote for them are struggling in different challenging conditions around our country.
Paul.
I agree with Thulani. I think that it will, if there's going to be change, it's going to be bottom up change. Because of what's happened to the masses of people. I mean, I think that is true. How much that could be, I don't think it's, you know, the ANC is very powerful in rural areas. There's hardly, other than the church, there's no other movement in rural areas that gets political support. So, in my mind, anyway. So, they're the party that brought freedom to the country. That's a very difficult thing to dislodge in people's minds. But I think that issues like unnecessary deaths, unnecessary starvation, poor order is a big issue. And, you know, the ANC's policy in pre-democracy age was to make the country ungovernable. I mean, and they were very successful at doing that. They really haven't made it governable since then. And they've neglected that aspect of it. And they created huge expectations in people that in one day, from 93 to 94, suddenly the country was going. It was silly, in fact. And they tried to do it by packing people into government jobs, taking reasonably unqualified people to do qualified jobs. And now you're just reaping the benefit of that bubble burst. I mean, the reality is now here. You know, the incompetence level at even functional units is really low, and I don't know how it's fixable. So I'm despondent. You know, I agree with Thulani, is that the ANC really, if it wants to do anything, it should bring the other political parties together with it, and not think that it has to manage this whole problem somehow on its own.
Part of the problem, John, is that the ANC is a massive organization. It's a very broad church. It's does it have 60% of or over 60% of the electoral support within the federal parliament? So there seems to be no way that it can be challenged, or maybe you can see some chink in that armor.
Well, the real problem in the ANC, Nicholas, is that there are these two very strong factions: the pro-Cyril Ramaphosa faction and the former President Zuma. And so these two, it's been a relatively equal battle since Ramaphosa came into power, and that constrained him, and probably to extent still does. But I've been looking at this question that was raised in the last few weeks, and I may do some writing on it. You know, the populism we see here versus the sort of progressive ideas, which is a sort of ideological battle that is evolving in America as well and elsewhere. I mean, it's interesting that the populism here is around a lot of the same issues. University fees are too expensive. Should there be a universal basic income grant and so on? Now, you know, South Africa already gives 17 million people grants, social grants, but it's mostly for the elderly or for children. And, you know, I think, frankly, this is getting ahead of ourselves, because I don't think South Africans are thinking in these terms in a very effective way yet. But it's possible that you move to, you know, because we have been we've also been on the receiving end of the unintended consequences of globalization. We also have towns that are sort of like Rust Belt towns that have just declined, and where there's very little hope and little activity. Our clothing industry was wiped out by when we joined the WTO and removed our tariffs overnight, which I think was a very bad idea. I think it should be much more phased. So there is the potential to move in that sort of direction, and like elsewhere, I think that's the ideological battle to come.
Right. Okay. Pamela Dickinson has got a good question. I think this is principally for both Thulani and Paul Davis. Pamela, are you there?
Yes. Hello.
So go ahead and ask a question.
Yes, I would like to ask, is there a model in other countries, you know, for this distribution of healthcare and or food, where one could use the local communities, bring in local leaders? It seems like it needs to be a ground up rather than a top down solution because of these multiple local communities.
Thulani, how does it work in Kliptown? I mean, you're doing it privately. What else is there?
As I said earlier on, that there hasn't been anything that came from top in our community. And to be quite honest with you, it works so well when it's led by people on the ground, because we know each other, and we, in a way that we even know who needs that food most compared to everyone in the community. So that's something that will work. We have seen again in other places where it's done by private sector in partnership with other NGOs that it's working well. I haven't seen any distribution that was done privately or by non-profits that was chaotic like the ones we've been seeing on the media through the government. Remember again that these are people that are used to their normal routines of office work and other things, where like sometimes it takes also a special skill to be able to deal with the people, to address with the people. Those that maybe are fortunate enough to go and address the people, you go to a community that has almost 80% of people speaking isiZulu and address such people in English. So you create, that's the first confusion. That's where the confusion starts, you know, and then things end up not going well. And then based on what I've seen over the last 48 hours, it's also about being known. You know, people going out there give like a very little grocery, taking pictures. To some people, it's just a PR exercise. You know, some of the things I was watching on TV yesterday, they were really embarrassing when I compared the food that we give and the food that was given. And the next thing, people have to be on TV. You know, some of these things you simply just have to give food without really showing the world you are giving food. Because at the end of the day, these are man-made challenges that can also be ended by men. As Paul correctly said it, that it has been so difficult for our country for our leaders to make this country, or the ANC make this country governable. You know, abiding to the law, it's one of our biggest challenges as a nation. It's so easy to just go around, like right now, since May 1st, it's been compulsory to wear the face mask when you go in public. But today, I've seen almost more than 3,000 people without their masks. Then it also questions how much people do follow the rules of the country.
Okay, I think there are two issues that you sort of picked up there, but Thulani, One is about whether people can follow the laws being implemented by the government. But the other point is, and Paul, you've got some knowledge of this, there are local networks for food distribution. There are local networks, as you pointed out, primary healthcare, that already exist. So surely those networks should be being used.
They're not. In a word, is that the success of Aurum has been able to work with local communities. We don't enter a community unless we have a local committee who's telling us what the problems are. We explain what we want to do and what our skills are, and we get buy-in for whatever program we've got. And the people aren't stupid. They ask very pertinent questions, and they want to know why you're there and how you're there. And then if they agree for you to be there, they expect you to do what you say. Now, that sort of feedback doesn't exist in the hospital or in the health system. The health people come from somewhere else. They put in buildings that local people aren't asked what kind of services they want. They get the services that are given to them. There's no discussion about it at all. And the whole idea of a participatory kind of democracy where you can use your vote to ensure that people are at least challenged for not delivering what they promised to deliver doesn't really exist. So people take to the street. People take to the street because they just get frustrated at every other level.
Yeah. Nigel Harley, your question, I think it's quite specific. Nigel, are you there? Maybe Nigel's not there. So I'll come back to Nigel in a second. But if we've got a couple of other people, there's a question from Diane Cook. If we've got Diane Cook lined up at all, have we got either of those up there?
Yeah, I've unmuted myself.
Okay, great, Diane.
Yeah, I was just, Thulani, I loved your introduction and your comment about young people being the architects of their own strategy. Do you see them actually coming forward as this goes on and we don't know where it's going to go, but into some pretty dark place? Do you see them actually coming forward in some sort of groundswell of change?
So maybe I can follow up on the back of that. I mean, Thulani, you're trying to get people through high school. You must have had some successes, so maybe you can tell us a bit about that. But also, a more general question is there a younger leadership coming up and challenging the people who've been in power for all this time? And that's a sort of maybe extrapolating from that question. But first of all, the successes you've had in your community.
Yeah, I think our generation is really coming up very well. You know, we are starting to see young people in general starting to be concerned, to be anxious about what's happening around the nation. And people are starting to realize that their solutions are not going to come from the politicians. People need to do something locally so that they can be able to influence the systems. As Paul correctly said it, that people always know what they want. You know, it's a matter of really facilitating what they really want. And through our program, we have seen more than 45 young people graduating from universities and colleges, now working for themselves, lives changing. And these are the people that we do hope that in future, South Africa is going to be in good hands. I think this COVID-19 could also be a blessing in disguise in terms of rebooting our country and starting to add more leadership into our parliament. Because yes, the EFF does have a number of young people in its benches, but what are those young people? They always go fighting whoever who's the president. We never hear young people's things addressed, you know, young people's needs being addressed. And again, our biggest challenge that we see as young people on the ground is that almost like 60-70% of our parliamentarians are people over 60, and those are people that are talking about Vision 2060. Then we're wondering that why are our people planning for things that they might not be there when they need to be implemented, because each generation have its own challenges and it also have its possible solutions. All we need right now is self-belief, because the biggest threat to young people is when people are underestimating themselves, and the fear of the unknown. So all we need to do is to encourage more young people to do what they can with whatever that they have in their respective communities. And the more people are actually given ownership of whatever activity they do, then we see success. Look in our community, we started the program from the community. We knew the challenges, we knew the solutions, and things have been working. So in other communities, people just need to be empowered through resources, and they know how to get things going.
Paul, you were laughing at one point, and I'll get you to follow up on Thulani's point, but I think Nigel Harley's got a question that all of you can answer, but Paul, will come back to you as well. Nigel, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, clearly, yeah.
Good. Now, I wanted to just ask about the various stages. I understand there are sort of 5 stages that have been laid out by the government, or levels, and that, in fact, you've now reached level 4. One of my reasons for asking this is that I understand under level 4, it's now permitted to export wine out of the country. But the embargo on the sale of all alcohol still applies. I gather that will not be removed until stage 3. The reason I'm asking this is I have an interest in a transformational wine farm, and really people in the wine industry are hugely concerned about how things are going to develop, and of course it is quite an important part of the economy. So I just wanted to get the views on really how feasible the various stages are in being unlocked. Thanks.
Paul, do you want to take that one first, and then we'll go on to John?
Any reduction for me in, if there was a policy of social distancing and it could be enforced, I would recommend that one gets to level 3 or level 2 as quickly as is possible. From a medical perspective, from an economic perspective, it should be there already because of the damage that is being caused. And a lot of the rules between 4 and 3 are not logical. And the motivations, the issue with alcohol is a vexing one, because I mean, since the interpersonal violence has gone down dramatically in the country, and that's probably mostly as a result of not much alcohol. The smoking one is much more difficult to understand. It's and both of those prohibitions are doing a lot for the illegal industries in those fields. Illegal cigarettes and illegal booze is, it's like bootlegging in the old days. So I'm not sure. It's a terrible thing, because the risk to any person who breaks lockdown is that you may get a trivial or minor illness, but there's no guarantee of that. The deaths occur in all age groups. So you're rolling a dice when you decide, well, I'm going to go to work and I need to do this and I need to do that. You have to understand that may be lethal. It may be lethal. And you don't.
Paul, at this stage, you can understand people's frustration, because they would say, listen, how many deaths have there been in South Africa? A couple of hundred. How many people are infected? It's tiny. So, I need to get on with my job. And we're not I
understand it. But you should do that knowing that you might get the disease and it might be lethal. I mean, that's a reality, and that's not political.
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
So we have a question from Victoria Barclay. I mean, I don't think we've mentioned, it's a good question, because she says, what is the population of South Africa? Is it about 55 million? Am I right in saying that?
17.
Yeah, currently. And she's saying here the majority of COVID deaths seem to be in the over 80s, and after that, the over 65s. So, what proportion of the population, who is being affected thus far?
If I could say that South Africa, in that sense, is blessed with a young population. is that the majority of people, a very small percentage, are older than 60, except amongst whites. 25% of whites are above 60 years old. But to be a apartheid in black communities, it's less than about 5 or 6% of people. So there is that skew. But the deaths in elderly people are also the deaths in people with comorbidities. And that's where the problem is that hypertension, diabetes, obesity are the common Western ones that are, and those are both, all those three are prevalent in South Africa, particularly the hypertension one. But you have to add TB and HIV. Mm. You know, so what would have been a very nice demographic, because there are not many elderly, becomes you don't know in what the effect is going to be in the younger groups. And the government, you know, I really sympathize. I don't know what you do. You know, I think they're really trying to be sensible in terms of what they're doing, but they're following Western type of sensibility. I think they're not taking into account the stuff on the ground here, so, and they're not using agencies that know how to do it.
What can you do? I mean, what would you recommend?
I would make it a national issue, and not just a government issue. Is that the private sector is very willing and wanting to assist. At the moment, it's around money and voluntary organizations which are doing stuff. But I mean, we exist in 500 clinics where we run pretty good systems. And there are other NGOs like us that have similar, we could run those clinics, and they could free those staff in those clinics to go to other clinics. So it becomes
you're saying that the government is being too centralized. It's trying to keep all the decision making and the implementation within its hands. It's not actually delegating to the people who could do it.
Well, I think I think it'll come to that, but you could get there much more quickly. I mean, half the testing that's being done in the country at the moment is being done by the old organization I was involved with. I mean, we've done half the tests.
Yeah.
And that's a tiny little organization in terms of the whole of South Africa. You know, and I think there are 5 or 6 lookalikes in South Africa that could be doing exactly the same thing.
And they're not. This all sounds incredibly bleak. John, I'm going to come to you just for a last point about what you can see as a sort of short-term political future, and perhaps a bit about the economy as well. I think we've gone through a lot of questions, and we've covered a lot of issues here. So I'm very, very grateful for everyone's questions. And then we'll wrap up after this last thing with John. John, just give us an overview of where things that you think are heading politically.
Well, just to follow up on what Paul was saying, I think that our government has not been capable of getting the granular details right. And that's why, so when they take decisions, the decisions are very hard to explain. I mean, all bookshops were closed, all books were stopped. This affected me directly, of course. On the wine thing, I mean, there would be ways to open parts of the economy. For instance, and I know they're trying to do this, for instance, if we have mines that are in remote areas, if you test everybody and you isolate anybody who's positive, you could get our mines going. That would be a start to rebuilding the economy. There are many areas that needs to be done, and as quickly as possible. So far, the problem has been the government just hasn't been able to implement in the detailed way that is required.
There was just one follow-up, Paul, that there's been mention of there's a trial with the BCG vaccination. There's some evidence that vaccinations can improve one's immunity overall. Is that something you've been looking at?
Only in a global, where we're not doing any studies related to that. But the evidence has come from Portugal, where its BCGs are compulsory in all people. And it's been like that in this country. And there's the difference between COVID in Spain and Portugal has been dramatically different. And some people are saying that perhaps it's the BCG that's conferred some sort of additional immunity to the COVID virus. In South Africa, BCG has been very widely used. But I would not, we're just too early to say with any certainty. I would hope that it would be wonderful, really wonderful, if BCG proves to be a game changer here. But the evidence that we've seen doesn't seem to show that. But we've not done a study, so it's impressions. If I could just tell you that there's a guy, Tim Hutchinson, who Nigel might contact regarding farming, and I'll send you his details, the wine farming.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. That's very kind. Well, this has been a very interesting discussion. It's certainly been very informative. It's not a particularly optimistic one. I mean, I think it leaves me very concerned for South Africa's immediate future, and also there, and you must think of all the other countries that have similar infrastructure or don't have as much infrastructure as South Africa does. So it does leave me very concerned. I want to thank Paul Davis very much, Thulani Madondo, and then also John Matisonn. Next week on Tuesday, we've got David Smith, the economics editor of the Sunday Times, and Luka Gakic, an investment director with Ruffer Investment Management Partners. And the topic there is inflation. Is it a looming threat? So a bit of a change of topic there, but an important one nevertheless. And then on Thursday, I'll be speaking with the North Korean refugee and defector Yoon Hee Park, who has a remarkable story to tell. So do join us next Tuesday and Thursday. We'll look forward to seeing you then. And thank you very much again to everyone for taking part in this discussion. Thank you and goodbye.